There we go. Hello, and hello to everybody on Facebook Live. We're really glad you're joining us today, too. Thank you so much for being here. So we are here at the Washington Rebels Carpe Diem Arts Daily Antidote of Song, like we are every day at noon Eastern Time, singing one song together to keep our spirits intact through isolation. And also, as we've been evolving, dealing with a lot of social and racial justice issues in this room. It's been an amazing community to pull together. I'm glad we've got some new folks with us today, and Facebook new folks, well, we're glad you're here too. Please pop your state or your country into the chat box if you're new so that we know where you're coming from, and thank you so much for that. Couple quick announcements. My email is in the chat box if you want to email me to get on our daily email list or to just give me comments, suggestions, questions, anything. I'm happy to hear from you. There's also a donate link in the chat box. All the money that's raised goes directly to the artists who lead us in song. And a shout out and a big thank you to Nico Rossi DeMattis, who's managing the tech today. And today I'm very, very excited to have with me co-host Steve Winnick from the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, because today is day one of our Archive Challenge Week, a partnership that we're doing with the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. It's an exciting week, incredible lineup, and I am super in love with the song that we're going to hear today, which I got to hear in soundcheck yesterday. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who's going to introduce today's amazing artist, and Steve will host a discussion afterwards. Thank you, Steve, and hello, Joe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Joe, and thanks to Busy as well, to Revels, and to Carpe Diem Arts. This is such a great collaboration, and we're so happy to be here doing this. I'll just give a little background on the Archive Challenge. So back in 2015, my partner in crime, Jennifer Cutting, and I were thinking of ways to foreground Alan Lomax's recordings because it was his centennial. And Jennifer came up with the idea. We attend a meeting every year called the Folk Alliance Conference, at which folk artists and presenters from all over the country get together, all over North America and now all over the world, really, get together to discuss the art and also to do business. And Jennifer thought, wouldn't it be great if we created a special showcase where we got artists to learn.
Has Steve dropped out for anybody else or just me?
Yeah, no, I think he's
frozen.
He's AWOL for a moment.
Okay, so
yeah,
that's what I'm going
to...
I'll just pretend that I know what I'm talking about, but I actually really don't, because the Library of Congress Folklife Center, I did actually work there for 10 years, but have not been there for 10 years. So the collections that he's talking about aren't things I specialized in when I was there. And the Archive Challenge, in fact, started after I was there. And I'm going to take a moment quickly here to text Steve and let him know he's frozen in case he doesn't know. And in the meantime, did he just drop out? Great. Okay, so I think that means he'll probably come back in. So hello, everybody. So in our usual Zoom lifestyle, we know we've had some technical snafus, not very many, I have to say, during this program, but we've had a couple. One that was a real doozy, as you all remember, after listening to me talk for 18 minutes. But we usually manage to get through this just fine. So I'm feeling not too worried right now as we wait for Steve to jump back in. He is actually coming today out of his home, and we've had fine internet service from his home before. So I could tell you a little bit more about who's coming up tomorrow, which is 2 of the members of the Barefoot Movement. And one of the things that I'm actually fascinated about this week is the notion that we are actually going to be hearing things, I think, a little differently than we usually do. So not only are we listening specifically to historic recordings that have been re-recorded, but each of these artists is bringing a really different sense of style to these recordings. And so when Steve first hit...
sorry about that.
Hello, Steve. Nice to see you again. I'll just finish what I was going to say. I was going to say last night when Joe first hit the guitar notes and began to sing, I got so excited because it's such a different sound than anything we've heard so far in the room. So, Steve, I'm turning it back over to you.
All right. So I'm not sure where I was when you guys would have stopped hearing me because it continued to look like
you were just starting to talk about the Lomax collection and why Jennifer wanted to start the Archive Challenge.
Excellent. So we started that in 2015. And it went so well that it became an annual event. And the change that we made was that after the Lomax Centennial, we didn't want to limit ourselves to Lomax collections, so we called it the Archive Challenge, and we just asked artists to learn a song from the American Folklife Center archive. So Jennifer and I both work at the Library of Congress in the American Folklife Center, and we have the largest archive of traditional folk songs possibly in the world, but the largest one in this country certainly. And that was the vision, was to get people to learn a song from the archive and perform it before a live audience. Well, so we've been doing that for the last few years, and then of course this year we had the pandemic, and we thought about ways to connect people to the collections that are a little different from that. And one of the ideas we had was what we call the Stay at Home Archive Challenge, or the Home Archive Challenge, where people record videos of themselves, place them on social media, and we then share out those social media from the library. Sometimes we don't do it for every single one, but people share them to social media with a special tag so that they're findable by anyone who's interested in the Archive Challenge. And this is kind of a third iteration, this collaboration, because when we heard the Daily Antidote of Song, and Jennifer and I have participated as performers in the Antidote a couple of times, we thought, wouldn't it be great to do an Archive Challenge week? And so we talked to Joe and Busy, and that is what we're doing. And so the first performer in our Archive Challenge week is Joe Jencks. And Joe has done the Archive Challenge at Folk Alliance 3 times, and so he's a veteran of this program. And he also just performed in our homegrown at home concert series. So he performed a number of songs, all from the same session of John Lomax in 1939. So in a second, he'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I should just say that Joe Jencks is, I guess, primarily known as a singer-songwriter, and he writes songs often with a labor focus. So he's known in the labor songwriting community, but he's also just known as a songwriter who writes beautiful songs about all topics. He's been touring internationally for about 15 years. And is well known on the folk circuit. Everybody loves Joe, and my favorite story about Joe is it used to be that Joe and I had more similar hairstyles. And so when I would walk around Folk Alliance, anytime Joe had a showcase the night before, people would say to me, "Hey, you were great last night," because Joe and I kind of looked like each other, so they were mistaking me for Joe. And for a long time, I would correct them, and then after a while, I figured all I had to do was be polite, and Joe would get the credit anyway. So I would say, "Oh, thank you very much." So Joe is great, wonderful singer, wonderful instrumentalist too. He'll tell us a little about his instrument as well. So I am going to turn this over to Joe Jencks, who's performing a great field recording from John Lomax in 1939. A woman named Gussie Slater sang this for John Lomax.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate the kind introduction, and I'm not sure if somebody needs to spotlight me in the system here or not, but whoever's running admin there.
So we will spotlight you back and forth. So
okay, great,
yes,
got it.
Thank you.
Got it. Yeah, I was really excited to receive the invitation this summer to dive deep into some particular area of the Library of Congress folk archives. And I dove deep in 3 days, June 2nd, June 3rd, and June 4th of 1939 at the Rayford Prison in Florida. John A. Lomax and Ruby Tara Lomax, John's second wife, were down there recording. They did a whole set of recordings on what they called the Southern States recording trip. And in 1933, John and his son Alan created, to the best of my knowledge, one of the very first mobile recording studios. And they took an old wax cylinder recording machine and bolted it. It was like 320 pounds, this device, and they bolted it into the trunk of the family Ford sedan. And they drove around and started collecting songs. And there was a deep understanding that the generation that was not really affected by radio and not really affected by this blossoming mass communication process was dying off, and that the oral traditions in all genres, all over the country. The oral traditions were, were starting to diminish a little bit. People were beginning to rely more on recorded forms. And so John felt very strongly about capturing that. And as I understand what I have read about his intentions, though obviously I never met the man, so I couldn't tell you for sure, but what I've read is that he was also concerned with issues of racial justice, and that for him getting into prisons and recording the oral tradition, particularly in African American culture, was something that felt like a way for him to shine light on, even then in the 1930s, the disproportionate number of people of color that were incarcerated. And and he did us all a tremendous service by capturing this music and putting it out there. The song I'm going to teach you today, and I hope you'll sing along enthusiastically from home, this being a Sunday morning that we're beginning, Sunday morning for some of us. It's already afternoon for some of you. But it's evening for some of you, I suppose, if you're joining us from the UK or from somewhere in Europe. But this is, it's fundamentally a gospel song, but there's a couple of things that are unique about it. One is that it typically spirituals reference Hebrew scripture and gospels are about Christian scripture and the gospels. And this blurs narrative from both into into one idea, and somewhat unique in the way that Rumi or Hafez would use many words to refer to the divine and use a capital letter to show that when they use the word potter or painter or some other word with a capital letter, that they were referring to the source of all creation. Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet, used this same technique in the poetry that he wrote in The Prophet. And in that spirit, it was very clear to me that this is one of the only songs I've ever heard, probably, that refers to Jesus as doctor, as healer, in that way. And you can, in the way that Gussie sang it, you can hear that capital D in front of doctor. So let me teach you the chorus to this, then I'll give you just a little more information, then we'll sing it all together. The chorus, the words are, as song leader, I would sing, "He's a battle axe," and you sing, "In the time of a battle." He's a battle axe in the time of the battle. He's a battle axe in the time of the battle. And then everybody sings, "Shelter in a mighty storm." And so, and I'll teach you a couple of harmonies as well before we get through this whole thing. But he's a battle axe in the time of the battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. And there's a turnaround that's really quick. It comes right out of the verses into that. It's like you have to count it in 2 rather than in 4, which is the inclination. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. So, if you want to do harmonies on that call and response, I'm singing both parts, and I'll keep singing both parts. But there's, he's a battle in the time of a battle, or in the time of a battle, in the time of a battle. It's all just arpeggiating on that one chord on the tonic. In the time of a battle. So those of you with lower voices, regardless of what voice part you sing, the basses, the altos, whatever makes sense to you, feel free to sing that. In the time of a battle, he's a battle axe. In the time of a battle, in the time of a battle, shelter in a mighty storm. So that's one part. Another part that you could sing. So the melodies, you notice, is kind of bluesy. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. kind of blurs that boundary between the major and the minor third there on the melody. It bends it a little bit. But the next note up would be the fifth. He's a battle on the fifth 1-5. In the time of a battle, he's a battle axe. In the time of a battle, he's a battle. In the time of a battle, shelter in a mighty storm. So those of you singing that, I'll sing the melody. You can practice singing that with me. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. And then the high part would start on the seventh. In the time of a battle, he's a battle axe. In the time of a battle, he's a battle axe. In the time of a battle, shelter in a mighty storm. Or those of you that want to sing that lower, you're welcome to sing it in a lower note. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle in the time of a battle. In the time of a battle, shelter in a mighty storm. So those are the parts. Let's just do one chorus, and you can all practice whichever part you're going to sing, and then we'll dive right into the song. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Sounds great. I can hear you from here. Sounds wonderful. And I'll just dive right into the song here. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Can no man do like Jesus? Not a mumbling word he said. He just walked right down to Lazarus' grave and he raised him from the dead. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Easter night, he started back home. Stopped in Jerusalem while pressing along. Folks said a doctor's got more treasure than gold. Doctor, can you feed a dying soul? He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Had it not been for Adam, there would not have been no sin. Adam broke the laws of these commands. Now we got a debt to pay. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Mary was seeking for religion. She was only 12 years old. skipping over hills and knocking. She knocked at Abraham's door. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Just like Abraham and Sarah, Mary had her loving son. She brought to the world a Savior, and now every battle's won. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. A is for Almighty, that's true. B is for baby like me and you. C is for Christ sent from God. D is for the doctor, man of all. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Shelter in a mighty storm. Shelter in a mighty storm. There you go. Battle Axe, recorded originally in 1939, the Rayford Prison, June 4th. Ruby Tiro was not allowed into the men's wing of the prison, and so she went in that morning into the prison chapel, and a bunch of the women came in and sang songs for her, and she recorded part of a service that they were holding as well, and yeah, pretty amazing.
Amazing stuff. So thank you so much to Joe. Let's have another round of air applause for the great Joe Jencks. And we're gonna ask Joe a couple questions, but before we do that, we thought it might be fun to play you just a few seconds of the original audio that the Lomaxes recorded in 1939 in Rayford Prison. So Nico, could you give us the beginning of Battle Axe? All right, so that's what it sounds like on the original field recording. And as you can see, and this is one of the things that attracted Joe to it, as he mentioned, is that Gussie Slater, the singer, just had really good, clear pronunciation, which not everyone did, and the recording just came through really well as well. So it's one that you can really hear what's being sung, and that makes it, more appealing as a song to listen to. And so Joe really did a great job with it, we think. So Joe, we have a few questions that are being communicated from people around the Zoom room and elsewhere. So first of all, I should say that my partner in crime, Jennifer Cutting, would be here with us in the Zoom room, but she's away in a place without good Wi-Fi, and so she's not able to get into the Zoom room. So she's watching on Facebook. So hi, Jennifer. And she texted me a question for Joe to talk about your songwriting a little bit and what you call anthropological songwriting.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad. Thanks for asking that question. I was hoping we would get there. So as I was listening to the recordings, then I transcribed, I think, 10 different songs, or to the best of my ability, and then selected 5 for the the homegrown concert that were the ones that really settled in for me. But there were holes in the songs. There were places where no matter how many, filters I processed through in my professional audio gear, like I just could not lift out certain words. And Jennifer and I had a conversation before Folk Alliance when I was working on Take This Hammer. And Steve and I talked about it, and they both encouraged me to use my knowledge of history, my knowledge of the idioms, my knowledge of the styles of music and of language, and my skills as a songwriter to infill the holes, as intelligently as I could, but to not tear my hair out trying to invent something that didn't exist. So when I did write words, I used the cadence of what was already there. And I used language that would have been typical and in keeping with the rest of the song. In this song, I only inserted a couple of words that I couldn't lift off the recording, and then one whole verse. Because I was a little puzzled. There's the verse, when Mary was seeking for religion, she was only 12 years old. She was skipping over hills and knocking. She knocked at Abraham's door. And that was it was bringing up something in my consciousness, but I couldn't quite name it. And so I did some research, and of course that comes out of Genesis, out of Hebrew Scripture. I think chapter 18, verses 8 through 15, roughly, that talks about Abraham being in his encampment with his wife Sarah, and three travelers came to visit, and they knocked at Abraham's door. And Abraham immediately recognized that there was something a bit otherworldly about these travelers. And so he asked Sarah to make bread for them, and he went down to pull a calf out of the field so that he could prepare a feast. And as these strangers were leaving his encampment, they said, "We will return here in 1 year to celebrate with you the birth of your son." And for those of you familiar with Hebrew Scripture and Christian Scripture, Abraham and Sarah had been trying so long to have a child together. And this was basically the prophets coming to them and acknowledging, that their faith was being rewarded. So, of course, when you bring that forward into the gospel tradition, out of which Battle Axe comes, it's reference to that moment. But I felt like the song would serve, at least modern ears, would be served by having a little more context. And so I wrote that next verse, just like Abraham and Sarah, Mary had her 11th son. She brought to the world a Savior. Now every battle's won. He's a battle axe. It felt like it needed that one little bit of tie-in. And yeah, I'd call it cultural anthropological songwriting. I wanted to dive in to complete the narrative. And of course, because it was referencing some existing sacred texts, it's possible to go back and figure out what piece of the story isn't there, or why it ties in, or why it's relevant. But some of the other songs, there were verses that were published, but they weren't the complete verses. John Henry or Take This Hammer, there were verses that were put in a songbook in 1941, and then that became source material for other songbooks. But like a big game of telephone, the songs kept changing. And it was really refreshing to go back and transcribe as much as possible of the original verses, and then to fill in the gaps. There was one verse where all I could get was the word drown. I could feel the cadence. Lord, I'm coming. Don't you let me something drown. And so I wrote a verse and Take This Hammer. Lord, I'm coming to that Jordan water. And of course, Jordan River, Jordan waters, being very symbolic in a lot of spirituals and gospel songs. And so, yeah, it was fun. It was really fun to take, a lifetime of being a geek and diving into folk music and have a place to park it. And it's been now actually 22 years that I've been on the road full time, traveling throughout the U.S. and Canada and a little bit in Europe. And if I were still touring as I normally had, I wouldn't have had time this summer to dive this deep into this one project. And so it's been sort of, one of the side blessings of being grounded as a result of COVID, is that I was able to dive deep and have fun with this.
Yeah, well, and another trick which you've used, and which is easy to use with these songs, is that so many of the songs have verses that float from song to song, that if you can't hear what's being said in one song, often there's there's a parallel verse in what you would have to call a different song, right? It's not necessarily a version of the same song, but they share all these verses, and you can find stuff that way as well. And
Yeah.
that actually relates to a question that we've gotten in the chat about the sort of rules for participating in the archive challenge. So the question is from Greg Lewis: what are the rules for covering the songs? Can there be variations, musical variations, word variations, etc.? What are the limits on the artist's recreation? And actually, we don't put any limits on that in terms of, particularly not in the Stay Home Archive Challenge, because it's really we're not going to acquire the collection as an item in the Library of Congress anyway. So it's anything that people want to do. We just want to get them involved with our materials, so they can write a whole new song that's inspired by one verse and call it an archive challenge. That's great as far as we're concerned. Usually within the showcases at Folk Alliance, it's a bit closer. People will do a version of the song, but they're free to write their own verses, change things around, add harmonies, even change the melody if they want to. We don't limit people very much. We're more interested in people being inspired by our material than in setting rules for for what they can do. So that's kind of the answer to that. People can do whatever they want.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, of course, is how do you take an ensemble song and render it as a soloist? And this song, I tried it on my acoustic bouzouki, I tried it on acoustic guitar, and I realized this is an electric bouzouki that was built for me by my friend Baird Blaine a couple of years ago. And this is my battle axe. And it just, it felt like the right thing.
Right.
And I debated, how would Gussie feel about, of course I can't know, but how would she feel about a distorted, overdriven electric instrument? And I thought, I bet she would have loved it.
Yeah.
Its power, like it conveys the vehemence and the, just the deep focus of the way that she sings that song. And I can't create a chorus as a soloist, especially now in COVID. I can't do a live performance with a group of other people. And so this instrument just gave me, some very ethereal sounds to play with, it's a little like, okay, we have just entered in the way that you do when you enter sacred space, when you enter a chapel, when you enter something. Like it just from the get-go, I felt like it set a tone that said, okay, this is something apart from normal time. This is a different event. This is a different experience. And the songs, they're both secular and sacred songs that come out of the Rayford Prison recordings. But for one of the sacred songs, and one that's really like, we're doing this, for somebody in a tough spot for whom their faith is really the only anchor that they have. Of course, there's this tremendous, like, that's where the power is. That's where the hope is. And, the vehemence. So anyways, it's fun. I have some notes on my website if people are interested. It's joejencks.com, Jencks. And
that's in the chat as well for folks.
Yeah, I put a couple of, I've written a couple of different little versions of articles over the summer as I was working on these, but one of them has all the lyrics to all 5 songs that I did, and notes in bold where I changed, or in essence wrote things to cover spaces where it was inaudible to me. Other questions?
All right. Well, I will mention that there's another place that you can watch more of Joe, and that's the concert that he did for us just a couple of weeks ago in honor of Labor Day. We actually had 2 concerts that day, Joe Jencks and Cy Khan. They're both on the Library of Congress website. And we really enjoyed having Joe for that. And he plays this song along with several other songs from that Rayford session. And the link to that is also in the chat. Nico has dropped it in there. So we encourage you to go listen to more of Joe Jencks, both at his website, joejencks.com, and over at the Library of Congress website, loc.gov. And if you just search for Joe Jencks, you'll also find the other videos that he's done in the Archive Challenge over the years on the Library of Congress website. So I'm just seeing we got one new message in the chat. Let's see if it's a question for Joe. Oh, that's just Nico sending the link again. So It's
There's actually one. Someone has asked if Joe can talk about his instrument and the tuning. I think that's a great question. Can we take that?
Sure. So a bouzouki is in the mandolin family. A bouzouki. I have an acoustic bouzouki over here that's shaped like an old parlor style guitar. And that had to do with the tone that I was hoping to get out of the instrument. And Baird and I had a conversation about that. And he came up with the idea of that shape, but it was based on what I had asked him to create in tone. And then he just surprised me with the electric bouzouki. But I keep them both in a variant in the Appalachian fiddle tune. Some people call it cross fiddle or Appalachian cross tuning, where instead of G, D, A, E, it's G, D, G, D. Those of you that are guitar players and know dadgad, that's often used in a lot of Celtic music and some blues. This is a little bit like dadgad for a mandolin or a violin. Instead of being G, D, that would be G, D, D, D. That would be a violin or an octave mandolin. Or it's just I take these two strings, drop them a whole step, G, D, G, D. And that gives me some of those power chords. And for some reason, it was just intuitive to me to put it in that tuning. It made more sense to my brain and my fingers. But there's about 6 or 7 different common bouzouki and octave mandolin tunings out there. But either they're intended mostly to be open tunings or they're basically standard violin tuning.
And I'll also mention for people who might be confused by the word bouzouki, of course, it's a Greek word for a Greek instrument, which at one time had 6 strings. But a few Irish people went over to Bulgaria and Romania in the 60s and 70s, and they brought these instruments back, and then they reverse engineered them for Celtic music, and that's why we have the 8-string is the common bouzouki that you see now, the kind that Joe is playing. And so it's tuned in that fiddle, in variations of the fiddle or mandolin tuning. But it's not identical to the Greek bouzouki, but it still retains the name from the Greek instrument.
But interestingly enough, a lot of modern Greek bouzouki's are 8-stringed instruments.
Right.
It's now hopped back the other way.
Yeah.
Most of the time now when you see a bouzouki, it'll be an 8-string. Yeah. Amazing instruments. And of course, the Irish had the mandolin much earlier. Traders and sailors throughout the Mediterranean would go up, up the coast and up to the UK and up to Ireland and bring instruments with them in their travels. And the mandolin, being small and hardy, made its way around quite a bit more than some of the bigger instruments. So it's a marvelous interplay between cultures that have led us to this Frankenstein of an instrument that I'm playing now. That's conveniently shaped like Bill Monroe's mandolin.
That's
it's
right.
Like one of the old F-hole mandolins. And it's an homage to all sorts of things all in one place. It is by its very nature a multicultural experience playing this instrument.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. So before we wrap up, we usually have the artist play the chorus just one more time for people to sing along once more. So let's hear Joe do the chorus again.
He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's a battle axe in the time of a battle. He's the battle axe in the time of a battle. Shelter in a mighty storm. Shelter in a mighty storm. Shelter in a mighty storm.
Wow. So thanks again, Joe. And on behalf of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, I want to also thank Washington Revels and Carpe Diem Arts for putting together this great program. The wonderful Joe Jencks, and I'm going to turn it back over to the wonderful Joe Rossi to lead us out. So now the other Joe.
Thank you so much, Steve and Joe. Steve, that was a great discussion. And Joe, that was really great to get to hear some of the amazing stuff that you were saying, deeper ways that you write and think. And it was really, really your creative process. It was amazing. Thanks, Steve, for amazing hosting. Thanks, Joe, for amazing music. And I do want to say, Joe, the chat box is full of lovely comments to you. And don't worry, we're going to send you the chat box after the event so you can read it at
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's actually super fun to do that afterwards and get to see what everybody was saying and thinking. Thank you so much also to everybody in this room for showing up day after day to join us in a song and to listen to discussion and be part of this. We are so grateful to this incredible community that's come together. And I am really excited also that everyone in Facebook joins us day after day. Thanks and goodbye to everybody on Facebook. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And goodbye to everybody in this room.